Hey, have you ever noticed this? Especially if you have children or if you work with people, which is going to be all of us. People are incredibly creative at coming up with excuses. Right? You've noticed that, right? You know, these are some real excuses that have been submitted, and these are just a few of the classics. I could find out one. Somebody's called into work and they said, "I couldn't come into work today because I accidentally got on a plane." Okay. Another person called in and they said, "I can't come today because I've got to attend the funeral of my wife's cousin's pet, and I'm a pallbearer." Okay, yeah, you know, it mustn't have been a goldfish. You know, what I'm thinking what are you thinking, like an elephant or something? But no, then that can't be it anyway. So yeah, what about this one? I can't make it today because I got my fingers stuck in a bowling ball. You know, how did you? I'm trying to imagine. I hope it was just one ball, clearly, because they wouldn't have been able to dial. You know, like, anyway, yeah. So aren't we creative at making excuses? Our children do it all the time, don't they? You know, I sort of think about, like, when our kids were younger, you know, and something happened, there was, you know, stuff all over the floor or a delightful new color of paint on the wall. And no one did it, right? It just happened. It's just like, yeah, you know, overnight there was a hamster that came downstairs, and it had superpowers, and it had a marker, and the hamster did it, right? It's like we're so creative at blaming others and making other excuses. And this is not a new thing. Of course, it's not a new thing. This has been going on forever. You know, like all of humanity has been doing this for ages. And there's excuse after excuse in the Bible. In fact, the Bible, which is a really old document, and even at the earliest, the beginning of the stories, the first story about the creation story, and a man and woman in a garden, you know, and they're being told not to eat some of this fruit, and they eat this fruit. And God's like, "Hey, what's going on? How did you do that?" And then they just make excuses. You know, Adam's like, "It wasn't me, it was her." Yeah? And then she's like, "It wasn't me, it was the snake." You know, we all just like shift and move and make excuses. It's part of human nature. And we're doing a new series at the moment. James kicked it off last week, and if you missed it, go ahead and watch it, catch up online, called Come to the Table. And he gave us a powerful message about God's grace and mercy extended to others. And we're going to carry that on a bit this morning, and we're going to look at a story when Jesus was involved at a time and people were making up some excuses at his day as well. And I want to give you the context of what was going on. We get told, we've been doing a series in Luke, and one of the things we looked at in Luke is Luke gives lots of details. He gives lots of information about people, places, and things. And in the book of Luke, which is his record of the life of Jesus, he investigated everything and put it together. It's in Luke, and it's chapter 14. If you've got your Bible, you can look at it. If you don't have your Bible, we've got the verses that come up on screen here. And in Luke 14, Luke actually writes and gives us the context. He tells us what's going on. And in verse 1, it actually says this. It says, one Sabbath, so he tells us when. So on one Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat at the house of a prominent Pharisee. So he's kind of giving us some context, giving us some environments, telling us what's happening. And it says he was being carefully watched. You know, reminds me of going places that weren't McDonald's with young children in a restaurant. You know, like, you remember when you like go somewhere, maybe if you had little kids and you go somewhere and you sort of feel like you're being watched, you know, you just hope that they mind their manners, and you hope that they do the right thing, or you hope that, and you sort of feel under scrutiny, don't you? And nobody actually comes out right and says it. But you feel it, don't you? You feel it, like you're being watched. You know, maybe you've had that experience in your workplace, or you've had that experience with other people, other friends, and it's just like, I just kind of like feel like I'm being watched, you know? And we kind of know what it's like, and Jesus is being watched. And it's crazy. We're not going to go into the whole chapter, but if you read the whole chapter, Jesus does a few things that are deliberately provocative. He deliberately sort of knows he's being watched, and then he capitalizes on it or something. He makes the most. He makes the most of it. He does this thing, and he starts off and he heals somebody, and it's on the Sabbath. We're told it's on the Sabbath. He knows everybody's watching him, and then he ends up healing somebody on the Sabbath, which is just like kicking the hornet's nest. And that's how he starts the evening, and then he carries on and he starts telling a couple stories because he sees how people at this meal, because the context is a meal, he sees how people are sort of vying over the best seat and they want to be, like the guest of honor, and they want to be important. And he sees that and he tells a story about not doing that. He uses the environment, and it's like he's being watched, but he's also watching what's going on. And he's sort of cutting through the political wranglings and getting to the heart of the matter of everything. He heals somebody on a Sabbath. He says it's not important to make yourself important. That's not the way the world should work. He's telling these stories, and then he tells another story, which is the one we're going to look at today. He tells this other story, and these stories are called parables. And a parable is a story that sticks with you. It's got more to it. It's got like something you can chew on. It's like, okay, this is not like a microwave meal. This has got substance. This is like something worth reflecting on and digesting. And so when you get home, when you get some time this week, read this chapter, read Luke 14, and like chew on these stories, because these parables are things that Jesus told us as stories that are going to stick with us. It's like a boomerang, and it's going to come back. It's going to come back. So it comes back. And so as you chew on it and meditate and learn, it's going to you'll come up with insights. You'll discover things that you might not have seen the first time. And that's what a parable does. It conveys more truth, and it gets under your skin. And Jesus tells a story, and he tells it like this. He says, there's this banquet that's prepared. And it's 14, verse 16. It says, a man was preparing a banquet, and he invited many guests. And at the time of the banquet, he sent his servants to tell those who had been invited, come on. Okay, party's ready. It's time to come. So he tells them to go tell everybody, it's ready. It's time to do it. Now, we have to just kind of pause here and look at a few of these things. Preparing a banquet. You do not ring Uber up. You do not ring somebody to deliver some food. You had to prepare everything from scratch in those days. If you were having a banquet and you were serving bread, somebody made the bread from scratch, right? If you had a side dish of vegetables, somebody picked those vegetables, washed those vegetables, prepared those vegetables. If you had meat, there's usually fish or even other types of meat, like camel. No, just kidding. No, you didn't just like buy it prepackaged. You didn't go down to the supermarket and get a tray of burgers. It was already done for you. You don't get like a chicken that's already cut up into pieces. You didn't get a fish that was already cleaned and scaled and gutted and prepared. You had to prepare the banquet. You had to get everything ready, and it was a lot of coordination. You didn't just, this isn't a spontaneous, hey, what are you guys doing this afternoon? You want to come around for a barbecue? Yeah, sure. Okay, on your way, can you pick up some sausages and 2 pack of burgers, and I'm going to get some pork chops, and I'm going to ring somebody else and see if they'll bring some crisps and drinks. I mean, we can spontaneously come up with a party. It didn't happen that way in this culture. You couldn't do it, They did not have stuff ready in the freezer, okay? You do, if you're going to slaughter the animal, you got to kill it, prepare it, slaughter it, get the meat ready, all that kind of thing, okay? There is no equivalent of just eat, okay? The disciples were not able to, there was no just eat in that day, okay? And this is many guests. Jesus is giving us the context. Many guests. There's a banquet and there's many guests, okay? It's not like 1 or 2 people. It's not just close friends. There's many guests. And culturally, the way it works, tell those who are already invited. Yeah, this isn't their first invitation. What happens is you would get, your first invitation would be, we're going to have a banquet and we want you to come. And they make the plans, they say they're going to be there. And then what would happen is once it was ready, you'd then go and let people know, okay, it's ready. It's like a two-way invite, if you like, a two-way thing. And so this is not the first time that these people will have heard about this event happening. Now, it's also possible, although it's not explicitly clear in the story, a lot of commentators believe this is referring to like a Jewish wedding feast. And guess what? They lasted for a week. Okay, they weren't like select people that only came to the evening thing, and only a few of your closest people came to like the bit after the ceremony sort of thing. This is not just a cold buffet or a bit of food that's put on the side. I mean, this was a full-on week. You thought your wedding was expensive. Just imagine if you you had to do it for a week, right? You're like, oh, thank gosh, I only have one child. Anyway, this was like a big event, and people think it could be referring to this wedding type of banquet, this wedding feast, although it's not explicitly clear. But they would have known in advance, and they would have had to RSVP to say that they were coming. It's like saying, yes, I'll be there, and the second call is, hey, it's ready, come on down. And then what happens is, this is where people are so creative. They're just so creative. And in verse 18, they all began to make excuses. They all began to make excuses. And the first one says, I've just bought a field that I have to go inspect. The next one says, I've just bought 5 oxen, and I got to go check them out. And the other one says, I've just gotten married, I can't come. And culturally, these are lame excuses. Okay, these are duds. Okay, these are just stupid. Yeah. Culturally, everybody hearing Jesus' story would have known that these are dumb excuses. Because you don't just buy a field without inspecting it. And you don't just buy 5 oxen that you don't even know are broken in, don't even know are you don't just do that. It's what I'm saying, it's not the way things were done. He's trying to say these people think they have so much power and wealth, they can just do these things. These would be offensive type of attitudes to you, sort of offensive things. And then the one about the wedding is quite interesting because you didn't just get married. This is not, shotgun weddings weren't a thing, right? These were planned events that the families would have been involved with, and there would have been a period of engagement, and then a big ceremony, and then the wedding feast. We just said how a wedding can last for up to a whole week. You don't just make the food that day. Things would have been prepared over time. All of a sudden, it's not just oh yeah, and by the way, I got married last night. We went to Vegas, and oh my gosh, I came home with a bride. It's not like that. So it's so these excuses themselves culturally are actually offensive. And then the last one as well, he says he's gotten married and I can't come. Okay, it's like that first excuse when Adam says it wasn't me, it was her. It's just this person who's just shifting the blame. I can't come. I'm married now. If I wasn't married, I would be able to be there. It's her fault. It's basically what's going on. So it's not really I can't, it's I won't. The excuse is I can't come is empty. It's actually that I won't. Because culturally, these are just annoying. And ultimately, what they're all saying, which would be offensive, is this: our relationship is not a priority. Because culturally, they would have already been invited. They would have already said they're coming. They would have already agreed to be part of this thing. And now they're saying these other things have all surprisingly cropped up. And they're more important to me than our relationship. That's what's culturally going on here. So this is why these would have been offensive excuses. Our relationship is not a priority. And the servants come back to the master. Jesus carries on telling the story, and Luke writes it. It's in verse 21. He says, the servants come back to the master. And they tell them what happened, tell them what these people have said. And the owner, the master, he gets angry about this. He's upset about this. And he ordered his servant, he says, go quickly into the streets and the alleys and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. And I love the urgency there. Go. Don't wait. The feast is ready. Go. It's been prepared. Go. It's okay, that's fine. Okay. They didn't sort of sit there and have some board meeting and deliberate about what they should do and then do a survey. And no. Get it done. Go. So he just sends them back out. He's go quickly into the street. You gotta do it. And okay, go where we haven't gone before. Go to the streets, to the alleys. Keep going. Just head out. And then they come back. It says the next verse says, we've come back. We've done what you asked us, but there's still room. There's still more room. There's more. It just implies that the banquet is large. It was for many guests, right? It's a large banquet for many guests. There's still room. There's still food. It's going to go to waste. We do not have Tupperware in first century Judea. We do not have freezers. We do not have this stuff is going to be, this has been prepared. It's ready for you. There's so much left. There's so much more room. There's so much room. And the servants knew that their master was generous. They come back and they're like saying, hey, there's so much left over. And I wonder if the servant knows that the master is generous because they've experienced the generosity themselves. If you know what your master's like, if you've experienced it yourself, you know. If you knew your master was happy with a few people having made it, you'd have thought, job done, let's put our feet up and let's tuck into some nice food. If you thought your master was going to be happy with the handful that arrived, you'd have been like, okay, we've done our bit, yeah? But you must have known, these servants must have known that their master was not content with what was there, because the master had prepared for more. The master was lavish, the master was generous. And if the servants knew what the master was like, then they know the master would not be satisfied. Hey, we've done what you asked, but there's still room. There's still room. And the master sends them out again. He's like, go for it. Keep looking, keep going. And so the master says, go. And he sends him even further this time. He's like, go out into the roads, the country lanes, and compel them to come. First time it's like bring them in. This time it's like compel them. Compel them to come so that my house will be full. Who's the them? The blind, the poor, the crippled, the lame. That's the them. Compel them to come. Compel people to come. Go further than you've gone before. Compel them to come so that my house will be full. And I think we just have to pause here, because if you're a follower of Jesus, this is the instruction, this is the mandate that Jesus gives all of us as followers of Jesus. Because we are not supposed to just get full ourselves on what's been put on offer. We are supposed to share what's been given to us. The generosity that we've received is generosity that we are supposed to share, that we're supposed to give to others. And he told his disciples, remember he told them, go into all the world. He tells them before he leaves, he says, wait here and then wait in Jerusalem and then go to the ends of the earth. He compels them time and time again. He compels his disciples, his followers, to go out, to go spread the message, to go. Like, don't stop looking. Go further than you went before. Okay, I know we looked here, but let's go further. I know we looked there, but look there. I know you went there, but go there. You just keep looking, keep going, because there's a banquet. There's a feast. Don't ever stop looking. There's a banquet. There's a feast. There's something that's been provided. There's a life worth discovering. There's a life worth sharing. There's a life worth living. And we should be sharing it and inviting and looking and seeking to seek the others, seek people who don't yet know what's been available, or find those who have forgotten the banquet that's been laid out for them. And I always get confused. I'm going to go on a soapbox for just a moment. So if you don't like this bit, you can rewind it. You can edit it out of your talk or whatever. I'm just going to go on a soapbox for just a moment. So just excuse me here. I'm going to give you a qualification for this. I always hate it when people bring in the size of church, because the size of church is irrelevant. I prefer a small church. I prefer a big church. Okay, that's cool. Okay, that's personal preference. But there's no one that's greater or lesser than the other in terms of God's heart. The size of the church is irrelevant. The issue is the size of our heart. The size of the church is irrelevant, whether it's 5 people, 50 people, 5,000, 50,000, who cares? The size of the church is irrelevant. The issue is always the size of our heart. Are we open enough and generous enough for as many as we can feed at the banquet? That's the issue. And if God trusts us with 5, we will feast. We will do what we can. If he trusts us with 50, 500, 5,000, 5 million, whatever. See, the number is irrelevant. And so that's why I get annoyed when people use that as an argument as if that's spiritual. That's not spiritual. That's ungodly. What's spiritual is what's going on in your heart. Is your heart open enough for whoever God can bring, because he set a massive banquet. And so therefore we position ourselves to be servants of generosity. We position ourselves to be stewards of lavish generosity. Our position is that which should be: find those who do not know what has been laid out and prepared for them. And if we didn't find anybody that said yes this time, we're going to go ask again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and in this town, and in this street, and in this lane, and in this alley, and in this place. That's the issue. The issue is we have got to do what our master has told us to do, which was go. The master says go. That's it. We're not going to qualify or restrict his generosity. I'm not going to restrict what he's commanded us to serve. Do you understand what I'm saying there? So soapbox is over. You can park that. You can listen to it again and whatever. So that's my soapbox. So there's room at the banquet, but is there room in our hearts? That's the issue. No matter what the size of your church is there room in our hearts? And then Jesus says this at the end of the story. He then says to everybody in the room, prominent Pharisees and all these important people, he says to the people in the room, I'm telling you, those who are invited will not get a taste of the banquet. It's the people that have been invited, the people that already knew about it, the people that made excuses. They're the ones that already knew it was happening and said no. They said they were coming first, but then the second time when they're told it's ready, they said no, they didn't come. And this is where the context of the story is incredibly important, because we know that Jesus is eating a meal with a prominent Pharisee. We know that Jesus has already been seeing people sort of wrangle for positions and seats of honor and trying to get the most important seat at the table, and I want to be this and I want to be that, and how I get perceived by others. And we know that that's the type of people that Jesus is telling this story to. The prominent people have other prominent people in their circle, right? If you know anybody who's prominent in their field, when they get together and they strategize or something, maybe a leading businessman or businesswoman, they get together with other leading business people, right? People who are at the, Dragon's Den, okay, the people sitting at that table, or in those chairs rather, the people sitting at those chairs are all prominent people in their own fields. Okay, I am not going to ever be invited to be on Dragon's Den, okay? Well, I could give you like 50p for that. Okay, I'm not one of those kind of people that's going to get invited to those kind of circles. And Jesus is having a meal with prominent people. And the kind of people that sit at prominent tables with other prominent people are the sort of people that make excuses about what their relationship priorities are. And he says, those who are invited will not get a taste of my banquet. Now, this story is super challenging and makes us realize, oh yes, we should bring in the crippled, the poor, the blind, and the lame. That's not the full point of the story. That's not the full, he uses that to sort of challenge everybody. And here's how he does it. Because the Pharisees and prominent people are the sort of people that you invite because of who they are. And the poor, the crippled, the blind, and lame are the people you don't invite because of who they are. He's putting two types of groups, challenging us. You see, society at that time was cruel to those types of people. There was no social care program. You couldn't go down to the supermarket. If I've got an issue with my eye, I could go to the supermarket and I could go to the chemist at the supermarket or any pharmacy, and I can show them my eye, and they can tell me what kind of cream I need, or they can say, you need to speak to your doctor, or they can say, well, actually, you need to go to A&E. Okay, there was nothing like that then. There was no place you could go to sort of get that kind of help, Maybe some old wives' tale. Take camel poo and spread it on your eye. No, I don't know. There was there was nothing available. And so you couldn't go anywhere. You can't find out what you need. And they also taught, they being the Pharisees and religious teachers of the law, they taught that some of these things are your fault because of sin. So if you were blind, it was because of a sin. It was sin. Sin was the reason. Meaning, you must have done something wrong, or your parents did something wrong, and therefore you're now cursed. And that's why you've got this ailment. And they taught it like that. They taught it that it was your fault. There's other stories in John talking about they see a blind man, and the disciples say, Jesus, tell us who sinned. Was it him or his parents? So that they're taught that like the thing that they have, the ailment, was because of their own sin, their own curse. And so that's what they're teaching people. These people are considered less than. They have less privilege. They have less status. The crippled, the blind, and the lame, that little triplet of categories were actually ineligible for being in the temple. They're ineligible for serving in the temple. And the reason is because they were considered impure. Fundamentally impure. Here's what I mean. Imagine that I accidentally touch a corpse. Now, in those days, touching the corpse and getting the blood on you, that would make me unclean. I'm now impure. I've got this blood on me. I can go and I can wash appropriately, according to the rules, according to the rituals, according to the ceremony. I can wash. Well, lo and behold, I'm now clean. I can enter back into the temple. If you were crippled, blind, or lame, you could not wash that off. It wasn't something you accidentally got involved with. It was who you were. You are impure. You fundamentally are unclean. You are excluded. You are uninvited. You are unwelcome. It had nothing to do with what you touched or what you ate. It is who you are. Do you see the difference there? It wasn't something you could do a little sacrifice and perform something to get absolved and get your sin or your thing forgiven. No, you are fundamentally, you just are. You just are, you know? Very unclean. Have you ever seen How to Train Your Dragon? And like, this is a kid's film, sorry. Talk about How to Train Your Dragon. And the son's there, and dad looks at him, and he's like, he's trying to explain what's wrong with him, and he's like, nah. And he's like, you just gestured to all of me. You know, he's like, what? Like me? I'm just wrong? Like the whole thing is wrong. And that's what these people were. They were excluded because they were fundamentally wrong, impure, unclean, not allowed. There was no job prospects. Okay. I mean, we live in a society now which tries to find ways to help, and rightly so, support people who can get into work and get into jobs no matter what their physical ailments are. You know, we live in a society that wants to help people. That did not work out that way. In that day, you only had one option. You had to rely on someone else's care. You had to have someone else provide for you. Maybe you begged at the gates going in and out of a city, or begged at the gate of a temple. You weren't allowed in the temple, but you could get as close as possible and ask and hope and rely, and maybe wish that somebody on their way into the train station would give you 20p, or you're relying on the care and generosity of others. Their only hope was the generosity of others. And this host says, in this story, you are welcome at the table. The story before was all about honored guests. These are not honored guests. Yet he brings them in as honored guests. That's why I say read the whole chapter. We don't have time to go into it. Read Luke 14. Bring them in as honored guests. Jesus is sitting and eating with religious leaders who are watching him, scrutinizing him. They're being critical and they're looking for mistakes because they think they're better than him. They're looking down on him. They're wanting to sort of trip him up. You know, a relationship with Jesus was not their priority. You know, he was not there so they could learn from him. He was there so they could find fault with him. He wasn't there so they could, be open and hear him do some teaching and ask him questions and really sort of tell them what's going on in their hearts and help them with their doubts and their concerns. No. He was there because they're looking for ways to eliminate him. He was under scrutiny. And the saddest thing is, Jesus was the promised Messiah, that they should have recognized. Because the Pharisees, part of the priest order, they're the ones who are leading the people and should have recognized the master of the banquet is here. And they are the ones who should have been the servants bringing other people in to the banquet that was on offer. Because they were, at that time, before Jesus, they were the representatives of God to the people. And what happens is they say no. They reject him. They say our relationship's not a priority. They reject him so much so to the point that they actually kill him. They get rid of Jesus. But in this story, Jesus tells this story and he bypasses a whole segment of people and goes straight to those who should have been the ones being pointed the direction of the Messiah in the first place. This is why I say there's more going on in this story than just saying, make sure you have room at the table for someone who's not like you. The story's bigger than that. And this is why Jesus says the ones who were invited will not make it to the banquet. They were the ones who were invited. They were the ones who should have known. And instead of finding faith, they could only find fault. That's what's going on. He's in a room full of people who, instead of finding faith, can only find fault. They only find fault. And they don't get to experience what's going to be on offer. Now, you have to understand, the host is not being cruel or unkind. If you get invited to a party, or if you get invited to go to the cinema, and you just can't make it, so you say, I'm sorry, I can't make it. I can't make it. I'm not going to be able to go to the cinema. And your friends go to the cinema without you. Or they go to the restaurant without you. They're not being cruel and unkind. It's just that you said no, and so you can't make it. And so this is what's happening. The master is not being cruel and unkind. The master is saying, well, you've been invited, but I'm not going to force you. You've been invited to experience and taste of what I have on offer, but I'm not going to force you. And that's how all authentic relationships work, right? A true, authentic, healthy relationship, you should be in relationships where you don't feel coerced or forced. You should be in relationships where you feel free to say yes to the invitation or no to the invitation. And that's what Jesus did. Time and time again, when you read through the stories that Jesus did, he never coerced people. He always invited people. Come, taste, see, experience, discover. He invited people, but he never forced people. But we have to be aware that if we say no, then we miss out. And no one's being cruel, no one's being unkind. It just means practically we miss out. And sometimes it's hard for us to understand, well, how can a God be so kind and loving, and then all of a sudden people don't get to spend time with him or don't get to spend eternity, and maybe they go to a place called hell, whatever we have our afterlife imagined of. Or how can God be like that? Well, God's not sending you. You're essentially choosing to not get on that bus. This bus is now going to this location. You can jump on the bus and you can be part of it. If you choose not to jump on the bus, it's your choice. I'm not being cruel or unkind. I'm trying to tell you in as many ways as possible that it's available for you. Does that make sense? So he's not being cruel or unkind. God's heart is for all. He says in that story, my house will be full. There's a banquet for many, many people. There's so much generosity on offer. We've been invited. So we're going to wrap up this morning, and as part of how we wrap up this morning, we're going to spend some time just we've got some Ribena here and some bread. There's gluten-free at the back here as well. And I just wanted to take a moment to say, look, God has invited us to the most lavish banquet we can ever imagine. We don't always feel that way. We don't always experience it. We don't always understand it. But Jesus in his mystery gave us something so simple to help us remember. And the thing he gave us was bread and wine. Juice and Warburton's white fluffy loaf, okay? Something so simple, something every day. But something so simple that we can all do it, we can all participate, we can all discover, and we can all be reminded of the mercy and the faithfulness, the grace, the gentleness, the lavishness, the goodness of God. And we can remember that at this table, this is the table where he made reconciliation, where he brought us close again. The table reminds me that I always have a choice. I'm not forced. I have a choice. I'm invited, and I can accept the invitation or not. This table reminds me because it prompts me to do something, whether I sit and find fault or whether I find faith. The table reminds me. It challenges something in me. This table challenges me. Do I make excuses? Do I prioritize other things than my relationship with Jesus? This table challenges me. This simple little thing challenges us. This table reminds us that it's not just for us, that as servants of the Most High, we are part of a lavish banquet. We're part of a lavish feast, and we're supposed to find everyone and tell them about something. This table reminds me that the cost of following Jesus is high. N.T. Wright says that when Jesus wanted to explain his death, he sat down and had a meal. The meal reminds me of the blood of Jesus and the body of Jesus, that the cost is high. And following Jesus, the cost is high for us as well. It's costly. It's not cheap. This is costly. Because everyone who comes to a banquet has to remember and remind themselves that we're relying on the generosity of another. It's costly. I have to admit that I'm hungry. I have to admit that I can't keep doing what I'm doing, because even if I was poor, crippled, blind, and lame, I still had to stop what I was doing to come to the banquet. Everybody in the story had to make a choice. Everybody had to make a choice. So we all are reminded, when we come to the table, we are reminded that we all have to make a choice. We all always have to make a choice. Am I in need of fellowship? Am I hungry? Am I humble enough to accept what someone else has prepared for me? Am I humble enough to accept that Jesus' sacrifice, his life, death on the cross is enough for me? Am I humble enough to accept that? Or will I make an excuse? A simple little table reminds us. It reminds us that our only hope is the generosity of another. Our only hope is the generosity of another. I'm going to close with this verse from Romans. Paul writes it like this. He says in Romans 5, he says, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Rarely does anybody die for somebody else. But God showed his great love like this. When we were still sinners, he died for us. When we were still in a position like the crippled, the poor, the blind, the lame, when we were still in a position where it wasn't something that we could just wash off and be made right. When we were still in this position, he has done something to invite us, to welcome us, and to make us welcome and whole and clean, and now part of something that we may have felt excluded from before. We only rely on the generosity of another. This table reminds us that we are invited and we have been brought near. I want to pray, and then we're going to put some music on, and just come as you are, and just come forward in just a moment. Jesus, we thank you so much, God. You told us these simple stories that actually get under our skin. You're so good and faithful that you help us discover more about who you are. Thank you for this simple reminder, this meal. It's just simple bread and juice, God, but wow, it actually reminds us of what you've done. Thank you so much for what you've done. Lord, I just pray for everyone here that our hearts will be wide and generous. God, that we could be like you. God, I ask that you would help us all to find faith, not find fault. God, that you would help us all to be those who are servants for a lavish and generous banquet. And God, we are just broken without you. We thank you for what you've done. In your wonderful name we pray. Amen. Yeah, please feel free to, come forward, have some of the juice, and have some of the bread, and we'll just close in just a few minutes after that. As a closing thought, I want you to put yourself in the position of one of those servants who was told to go out. And you go out and you see somebody, and you can see that they're crippled. And you can't just say, oh, head over here, there's a banquet. You have to come alongside. You have to put your arm around. You have to walk with. You have to journey with, one step at a time. You don't just signpost. Imagine you're the servant and you see a blind person. And so you say to that blind person, that's okay, just head down sort of like where the paddling pool is in Letchworth, and across the street from the paddling pool, there's a building on the side, and that's called the Free Church Hall. And come along, we'll see you on Sunday. For someone who cannot see, you walk alongside and say, come with me. Let me show you. Let me take you. Let me save a seat for you. Let me make space for you. And if we're really honest, that's how every single one of us came to Jesus. Somebody took some time to walk with us. Somebody journeyed with us wherever we were at. Someone's doing it right now for your children and your young people. Someone's giving of their time to walk with, to journey with, to answer questions, to discover, to learn. Let's be people who walk with others. Let's be people who make sure we've got a seat saved for someone who's coming with us. Can we do that? So we close with this instruction. The same words that the master gave to his servants. Go. Go out. Go further than you've ever been before. Ask again. The person that said no, ask him again. The person that said no, ask him again. Go, 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 go. Compel and bring, because there is a banquet, a lavish banquet on offer for them. So we do that? Let's go. Amen. See you next week.